3:15 on a Tuesday afternoon in Cedar Falls, Main Street drowsy with autumn light. Ben Carter held his daughter Lily's small hand as they strolled past Miller's Hardware when the screaming started. Metal on metal, grinding, shrieking. A runaway truck barreled down Maple Hill, brakes dead, 20 tons of death hurtling toward the crosswalk. The woman in the pristine white coat stood motionless in its path, earbuds in, eyes distant, completely unaware that her next breath might be her last. Ben's world slowed. He released Lily's hand, exploded forward, his calloused fingers finding silk fabric, and yanking the stranger backward as the truck roared past, obliterating a streetlight in a shower of sparks. She collapsed against his chest, trembling, designer perfume unable to mask the salt of recent tears. Her shattered phone lay bleeding light across the asphalt, screen alive with 17 missed calls from Thornfield Legal and emergency board meeting. Urgent. But what kind of emergency pulls a woman in $1,000 clothes to a forgotten corner of Oregon where nobody knows her name? Amy Collins stumbled backward, her world spinning from the near-death experience and the solid warmth of the stranger who'd just saved her life. Through her shock, she registered calloused hands that spoke of honest work, kind eyes the color of storm clouds, and a 7-year-old girl with pigtails who was staring at her with curiosity rather than fear. "Are you okay, lady?" Lily asked, tugging on her father's worn flannel shirt. "Daddy, why was she standing in the road like that?" Ben Carter crouched down to his daughter's level, his voice gentle but strained. "Sometimes people get lost in their thoughts, sweetheart." He looked up at Amy, concern etching lines around his eyes. "You sure you're all right? That was too close." Amy opened her mouth to speak, but only a whispered "thank you" emerged. She'd been so consumed by the destruction her testimony would bring to her father's empire that she'd walked blindly into traffic, ready to let fate decide her future. The broken phone at her feet buzzed with another incoming call from Harrison Thornfield's legal team. Amy quickly stepped on it, crushing the last connection to her old life. Ben noticed the expensive device's demise but said nothing, just helped steady her as she swayed. "There's a diner across the street," he offered quietly. "Might be good to sit down for a minute, let the shock wear off." Lily bounced on her toes, excited by the drama. "Can we get pancakes, Daddy? I bet the lady likes pancakes too." Despite everything, Amy found herself almost smiling at the child's innocent enthusiasm. She hadn't eaten anything but anxiety for the past 48 hours. I'd like that," she managed, "but I should warn you, I'm not exactly good company right now." Ben's expression softened as he took in her red-rimmed eyes and the way she held herself like someone bracing for another blow. "Neither am I most days," he admitted. "But Lily here, she's got enough good company for all three of us." Inside Martha's diner, Amy slid into a cracked vinyl booth, while Ben ordered coffee and chocolate chip pancakes for Lily. The warmth of the place, grease-stained menus, local high school photos on the walls, the comfortable chatter of neighbors, felt like stepping into another world. Amy watched Ben interact with the waitress, noting how his face lit up when he talked about his daughter's upcoming piano recital at the community center. "You play piano?" Amy asked Lily, genuinely curious. The little girl nodded enthusiastically, syrup already decorating her chin. "I'm not very good yet, but Mrs. Patterson says I have natural rhythm." She pronounced the words carefully, proud of the grown-up assessment. Ben's smile flickered slightly. "We practice on the old upright at the church. Not ideal, but it works." Amy caught the undertone. Money was tight. She'd grown up with a Steinway grand in every room of their Manhattan penthouse, had taken lessons from internationally renowned instructors, yet she'd never seen the pure joy that radiated from this little girl talking about her weekly church piano sessions. Over the next hour, Amy learned that Ben had been a carpenter for the past 2 years, after his wife Anna died in a car accident. He'd left his job as an architectural engineer to have more flexible hours with Lily, taking on custom woodworking projects that let him work from home. Anna always said our hands were meant to create beautiful things, he explained, unconsciously rubbing a wedding ring he still wore. She was right about most everything. Amy felt a pang of envy at the evident love in his voice. Her own parents had viewed her primarily as a future asset to the Thornfield empire, grooming her for boardrooms rather than embracing her dreams of social work. "What about you?" Ben asked. "What brings you to Cedar Falls?" Amy's carefully constructed cover story, unemployed, taking a break from the city, felt flimsy under his honest gaze. "Just needed to get away from some complicated family stuff," she said, which was at least partially true. Lily, finished with her pancakes, was now drawing on napkins with crayons Martha had provided. "Are you going to stay?" she asked Amy directly. "Cedar Falls is really nice. We have a good library and everything." The next morning, Amy checked into the Cedar Falls Inn using cash, her fake identification holding up under the desk clerk's cursory glance. Room 12 overlooked the town square where a farmer's market was setting up for the weekend. She watched Ben and Lily browsing the vegetable stands, noting how he let his daughter pick out a small pumpkin, despite counting bills twice before making the purchase. Something about their quiet contentment drew her to the window. She'd spent the night replaying their conversation, particularly Ben's stories about Anna and the wooden music box he'd crafted for their anniversary just weeks before the accident. The way his voice caught when he mentioned that Lily still wound it every night, before bed had broken something loose in Amy's chest. She'd never experienced that kind of devoted love, the kind that persisted beyond death. Her own romantic history consisted of relationships built on mutual benefit, social connections that enhanced both parties' status. Watching Ben help Lily count change for her pumpkin, Amy wondered what it would feel like to be loved that simply, that completely. That Saturday, Amy found herself at the community center where Lily was scheduled to perform. The building buzzed with the energy of a small-town gathering, proud grandparents with cameras, siblings fidgeting in folding chairs, the scent of homemade cookies from the refreshment table. Ben sat in the third row, his hands clasped tightly as he watched his daughter adjust the bench at the old spinet piano. Amy slipped into a seat near the back, not wanting to intrude, but unable to stay away. When Lily began to play, a simple arrangement of Für Elise that would have made Amy's childhood instructors wince at the technical imperfections, the room fell silent. The little girl's face glowed with concentration and joy, her small fingers finding each note with determination. Amy felt tears she hadn't expected. There was something pure about this moment, untainted by the performance pressures and competitive rankings that had characterized her own musical education. After Lily finished to enthusiastic applause, Amy watched Ben stand up, his face radiant with pride, and mouth, "That's my girl," across the room. Following the recital, Amy approached them near the refreshment table, where Ben was helping Lily balance a paper plate loaded with cookies. "That was beautiful," Amy told Lily sincerely. "You played with real feeling." Lily beamed, cookie crumbs on her dress. "Did you hear the part where I almost messed up but fixed it? Daddy says that's the most important thing, not playing perfectly but not giving up when something goes wrong." Ben ruffled his daughter's hair affectionately. "Smart kid," he said to Amy. "Sometimes I think she's teaching me more than I'm teaching her." As other families filtered out into the crisp October evening, Amy found herself walking alongside Ben and Lily toward their beat-up Honda Civic. The streetlights were just flickering on, casting a warm glow over the nearly empty parking lot. Would you like to join us for dinner sometime this week? Ben asked suddenly, then looked embarrassed by his boldness. Nothing fancy, just, Lily's been asking about you, and I make a decent spaghetti. Amy's heart performed an unfamiliar skip. I'd love that, she said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. Tuesday evening found Amy standing on the front porch of a small craftsman-style house with blue shutters and a garden full of autumn mums. Through the window, she could see Lily setting napkins on a kitchen table while Ben stirred something on the stove, both of them moving in the comfortable rhythm of established routine. When Ben opened the door, flour dusting his dark hair, Amy felt something shift in her chest. Hope you're hungry, he said, stepping aside to let her in. Lily insisted on making garlic bread from scratch. The house was modest but filled with evidence of their life together. Lily's artwork covering the refrigerator, a half-finished rocking horse in the corner that Ben was clearly crafting by hand, family photos that stopped abruptly 2 years ago. On the mantel sat a wooden music box, its lid open to reveal a tiny dancing figure. Anna loved to dance, Ben explained, noticing Amy's gaze. I carved that for our last anniversary. Lily winds it up every night. Amy touched the delicate figure with one finger, marveling at the intricate detail Ben had managed to achieve in such a small piece. It's extraordinary, she breathed. You're incredibly talented. Over dinner, Amy found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't experienced in years. Lily chattered about school, her best friend Madison's pet hamster, and her theory that carrots grew better when you sang to them. Ben listened with the kind of attention Amy had never received from her own parents, asking follow-up questions and treating his daughter's observations with genuine respect. What kind of work did you do before? Amy asked Ben as they cleared the dishes. In the city, I mean. Ben paused, a shadow crossing his face. Architectural engineering for a firm called Morrison & Associates. We specialized in sustainable commercial buildings. Amy's blood chilled. Morrison & Associates had been one of the companies her father's investment group had systematically destroyed 3 years ago, stripping assets and leaving hundreds of employees jobless in the process. She'd seen the files during her investigation for the FBI. What happened? She managed to ask. Company went under pretty suddenly, Ben said, his voice carefully neutral. Bad investment choices by the parent company, or so they told us. 43 people lost their jobs right before Christmas. He shrugged, but Amy could see the old hurt in his eyes. Turned out to be a blessing in disguise, though. If I hadn't lost that job, I never would have had the time with Anna before she... He trailed off, glancing toward Lily, who was absorbed in coloring. The weight of her family's responsibility for Ben's professional destruction sat like lead in Amy's stomach as she helped wash dishes. Every laugh from Lily, every gentle comment from Ben felt like another knife twist of guilt. Her father's empire had been built on exactly these kinds of calculated cruelties, destroying smaller companies to feed Thornfield Industries' endless appetite for growth. She'd been working with federal investigators for months, building a case that would bring down not just her father, but dozens of his associates. The emergency board meetings she'd been avoiding were undoubtedly about containing the damage from her testimony. Standing in this warm kitchen, watching Ben patiently help Lily with homework at the table, Amy understood for the first time what her family's greed had cost in human terms. These weren't just numbers in a financial report. They were real people with real lives that had been casually shattered for profit margins. You okay? Ben asked softly, noticing her distress. You look like you've seen a ghost. Amy forced a smile, knowing she couldn't tell him the truth. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Just thinking about family stuff, she said. Sometimes the past catches up with you in unexpected ways. That night, Amy lay awake in her hotel room, staring at the ceiling and wrestling with an impossible situation. She'd come to Cedar Falls to escape the chaos of her testimony against Thornfield Industries, never expecting to find herself falling for a man whose life her family had already destroyed once. The cruel irony wasn't lost on her. Harrison Thornfield's daughter, groomed from birth to inherit an empire built on others' suffering, had found the first genuine happiness of her life with one of her father's victims. She thought about Lily's trusting smile, Ben's gentle hands creating beautiful things from wood, the way they'd included her in their small family circle without question or agenda. In the morning, she would have to make a choice: stay and build something real with them while living a lie, or leave before her past destroyed them all over again. Either way, she was already in too deep to emerge unscathed. The burner phone she'd bought buzzed with a text from her FBI contact. "Thornfield's people are actively searching for you. Time is running out." Amy turned off the phone and made her decision. Whatever happened next, she would have these few weeks of knowing what love could feel like. Over the following days, Amy threw herself into the rhythms of small-town life with desperate intensity. She volunteered at Lily's school library, helped Ben organize his workshop, and joined them for evening walks around the town square. Every moment felt stolen, precious beyond measure because she knew it couldn't last. Ben began to open up about Anna, how they'd met in college, their dreams of building sustainable housing for low-income families, the way she'd faced her illness with grace and humor until the very end. "She made me promise to stay open to happiness," he confided one evening as they sat on his front porch while Lily played in the yard. "Said life was too short to close your heart just because it gets broken." Amy felt the weight of his trust like a physical thing. "She sounds like she was an amazing woman," Amy said honestly. "I wish I could have met her." Ben studied Amy's face in the gathering twilight. "I think she would have liked you," he said quietly. "You have that same kindness in your eyes, that way of really seeing people." The comparison should have felt like a gift, but instead it twisted in Amy's chest like guilt made manifest. The fantasy shattered on a Thursday morning 3 weeks later. Amy was helping Ben sand a custom dining table in his workshop when Lily burst through the door, clutching a tablet borrowed from her friend's older brother. "Daddy, look! There's a lady on the news who looks just like Amy!" she announced excitedly. On the screen, a news anchor was discussing the ongoing federal investigation into Thornfield Industries, complete with file photos of the company's executives, including a professionally shot portrait of Amy taken at a charity gala the previous year. Federal investigators are still seeking Amelia Thornfield, daughter of CEO Harrison Thornfield, who has not been seen since she was scheduled to provide testimony 3 weeks ago, the anchor reported. Sources close to the investigation suggest her testimony could be crucial in determining the scope of criminal charges against Thornfield Industries and its associates." Ben's hand stilled on the sandpaper as he looked from the screen to Amy's face, recognition dawning in his eyes like a cold sunrise. Lily, oblivious to the tension, continued chattering. "She has the same hair and everything. Wouldn't it be funny if Amy was secretly rich?" The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Ben slowly set down his tools, his face cycling through confusion, realization, and finally, a kind of hollow understanding. "Amy Collins," he said quietly, his voice eerily calm. Or should I say Amelia Thornfield? Amy's carefully constructed world crumbled around her. "Ben, I can explain—" she started, but he held up a hand to stop her. "Lily, honey, why don't you take that tablet back to Madison's house? Tell Mrs. Patterson I'll pick you up in an hour." His daughter, finally sensing the adult tension in the room, looked between them uncertainly before nodding and slipping out the door. Ben waited until he heard the front door close before turning back to Amy. "Thornfield Industries," he said, the words falling like stones between them. That's the parent company that destroyed Morrison and Associates. That cost me my career, put Anna through hell working double shifts to keep us afloat. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. Your father is Harrison Thornfield. It wasn't a question. Amy nodded miserably, tears burning her eyes. I never meant for this to happen. I came here to hide, to get away from all of that. I had no idea about your connection to my life being destroyed. Ben finished for her. To my wife dying exhausted because she had to work herself to death after your family's company threw me away like garbage? Ben turned away from her, bracing his hands against the workbench, as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. So what was this? Some kind of rich girl's charity project? Slumming it with the working class to make yourself feel better? The pain in his voice cut deeper than anger would have. It wasn't like that, Amy said desperately. Everything I felt, everything we shared, that was real. I never lied about my feelings. Ben laughed bitterly. Just about everything else, your name, your background, your family's role in destroying my life. He picked up a piece of wood from the table, running his thumb along its smooth edge. You know what the worst part is? I was starting to believe that maybe Anna was right. Maybe I could be happy again. Maybe Lily could have someone who cared about her. He set the wood down carefully, his movements controlled despite the emotion in his voice. But you were never really here, were you? This was just a temporary stop while you figured out how to handle your real life. Amy stepped toward him, desperate to bridge the growing distance between them. That's not true. These past weeks have been the most real I've ever felt. You and Lily, you're the best thing that's ever happened to me. Ben finally turned to face her, and the look in his eyes broke her heart. Then why didn't you trust me enough to tell me the truth? Amy opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, the workshop door flew open again. This time it wasn't Lily who entered, but 3 men in expensive suits, led by a tall, silver-haired man whose presence commanded immediate attention. Harrison Thornfield stepped into the modest workshop like a shark entering a goldfish bowl, his cold gaze sweeping over the wood shavings and handmade furniture with obvious disdain. Amelia, he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. You've caused quite a stir. The board is in crisis mode, and the FBI is breathing down our necks thanks to your little disappearing act. Behind him, his security team fanned out, their positions clearly designed to prevent any escape attempts. Ben stepped protectively in front of Amy, his carpenter's frame seeming small against the corporate intimidation tactics on display. I think you're in the wrong place, he said evenly. This is private property. Harrison's laugh was as cold as winter wind. Mr. Carter, isn't it? Yes, we've done our research. Formerly of Morrison and Associates, currently a craftsman. The way he said the last word made it sound like something distasteful. I'm here to collect my daughter and return her to her responsibilities. This little fantasy she's been indulging in ends now. Amy found her voice, stepping out from behind Ben despite his protective instincts. I'm not going anywhere with you, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. I'm cooperating with the federal investigation, and there's nothing you can do to stop that. Her father's expression darkened. You naive child. Do you have any idea what you're throwing away? The family legacy, your inheritance, your future, all for what? This? He gestured dismissively at Ben and the workshop around them. A carpenter and his daughter in a nowhere town? Ben's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, clearly recognizing that this was Amy's battle to fight. Harrison continued, his voice taking on a persuasive tone that Amy recognized from countless boardroom manipulations. The investigation will proceed with or without your testimony. Your cooperation isn't as crucial as you think. But if you come home now, we can contain the damage. Protect what matters. Amy felt the familiar pull of her father's charismatic control, the voice that had shaped her entire life, telling her what to think, what to want, what to be. For a moment she wavered, caught between the life she'd always known and the fragile happiness she'd found in Cedar Falls. But then she looked at Ben, saw the quiet dignity in his posture despite being verbally attacked, remembered Lily's trusting smile, and the way she'd wound the music box every night in memory of a mother she barely remembered. "No," Amy said, the word carrying 2 decades of suppressed rebellion. "I won't be part of covering this up. People like Ben, like Anna, like everyone else you destroyed, they deserve justice." Her father's mask of paternal concern slipped, revealing the calculating businessman beneath. "Very well. If you insist on this path, you'll do it without family support, without financial resources, without the protection the Thornfield name provides." He turned to Ben, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "As for you, Mr. Carter, I'd be very careful about harboring a federal witness. There are laws about obstruction of justice, and I have very good lawyers." The threat hung in the air like poison. Ben straightened to his full height, meeting Harrison's gaze without flinching. "Are you threatening me in my own home, in front of my daughter's friend?" he asked quietly. The steel in his voice surprised even Amy. "Because I should mention that this entire conversation is being recorded by the security system I installed after my wife died. Amazing what working-class people can afford these days." Harrison Thornfield's composure cracked slightly at the realization that his intimidation tactics were being documented. "This isn't over, Amelia," he said, signaling his men towards the door. "You think you understand the consequences of your choices, but you have no idea what world you're walking into. When this all falls apart, and it will, don't expect to come running back to family." After they left, the workshop felt smaller somehow, tainted by the intrusion of corporate menace into what had been a sanctuary of honest work and simple dreams. Amy slumped against the workbench, the adrenaline of confronting her father finally giving way to the crushing weight of reality. "I'm sorry," she whispered to Ben. "I never wanted any of this to touch you and Lily." Ben stood in the center of his workshop, surrounded by the fruits of 2 years of rebuilding his life after tragedy, and Amy could see him calculating the cost of being associated with her. The federal investigation would bring media attention, scrutiny, possibly danger. His quiet life with Lily would be shattered all over again, this time because of choices Amy had made. "I need to think," he said finally. "This changes everything." That evening, Amy sat alone in her hotel room, staring at her reflection in the darkened window. Her father's words echoed in her mind, mixing with the hurt in Ben's eyes and her own crushing guilt over the deception that had poisoned everything good she'd found. The burner phone buzzed with messages from Agent Martinez, her FBI contact, urgently requesting a meeting to discuss her safety now that Harrison had located her. But Amy couldn't focus on federal investigations or witness protection protocols. All she could think about was the way Lily had looked at her with pure trust, and how Ben had started to let his guard down after 2 years of carefully protected grief. She'd destroyed that. Her family's legacy of destruction had claimed 2 more victims, and this time she'd been the weapon of choice. A soft knock at her door interrupted her self-recrimination. Amy opened it to find Ben standing in the hallway, his face unreadable in the dim light. "We need to talk," he said simply. Amy stepped aside to let him in, her heart hammering against her ribs as she tried to read his expression. Ben remained standing near the door, as if ready to flee at any moment. "I've been thinking about what your father said," he began, his voice carefully neutral. "About you being a federal witness, about the danger this brings to Lily." Amy's stomach clenched with dread. "Ben, let me finish." he said quietly. I also thought about something else, about the way you looked when you realized what Thornfield Industries had done to my family. The way you've been with Lily these past weeks, like someone who'd never been around genuine affection before. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Amy had come to recognize as his way of processing difficult emotions. Your father destroyed my old life, took away my sense of security and purpose. But if he hadn't, I never would have become a carpenter. Never would have had those extra months with Anna before she died. Never would have learned that I could build something beautiful with my own hands instead of just designing things for other people to build. Amy stared at him, hardly daring to hope at the direction his words seemed to be heading. What are you saying? Ben took a step closer, close enough that she could see the conflict warring in his storm-grey eyes. I'm saying that maybe some good can come from terrible things, if we're brave enough to let it. Ben reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something wrapped in soft cloth. I started making this the day after we met, he said, unfolding the fabric to reveal a small wooden figure, a woman in a flowing dress, carved with the same delicate detail as the dancing figure in Anna's music box. I wasn't sure why I was making it, but my hands seemed to know what they wanted to create. Amy's breath caught as she recognized the figure's pose, the way the carved dress suggested movement, as if frozen mid-dance. It's beautiful, she whispered. It belongs in the music box. Ben said, Anna's dancer was always alone in there. I think maybe she was waiting for a partner. The metaphor wasn't lost on Amy, the wooden figures representing not replacement, but addition, not forgetting Anna, but allowing room for new love alongside cherished memories. But this only works if we start completely honest with each other. Ben continued, no more secrets, no more hiding. If we're going to face whatever comes next, we face it together, with all the truth between us. Amy took the carved figure with trembling hands, marveling at the way Ben had captured something essential about her in the grain of the wood. There's so much you don't know about me, she said. Ugly things about my family, about the kind of person I was raised to be. Ben cupped her face gently, his calloused thumbs brushing away tears she didn't realize she'd been crying. Then tell me, he said simply. We have time. 4 months later, Amy stood in the witness box of the federal courthouse in Portland, her hand steady on the Bible as she swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The courtroom was packed with journalists, federal prosecutors, and representatives from the dozens of companies that had been destroyed by Thornfield Industries' predatory practices. In the gallery she could see Ben sitting in the third row, his presence an anchor of calm in the chaos of legal proceedings. Lily was in school, safely away from the media circus, but Amy knew the little girl was thinking about her. She'd left a hand-drawn good luck card on Amy's breakfast plate that morning, complete with stick figures of the 3 of them holding hands under a rainbow. Harrison Thornfield sat at the defendant's table, his face a mask of controlled fury as his daughter methodically dismantled 2 decades of carefully constructed corporate crimes. Amy's testimony was precise, devastating, and corroborated by thousands of documents she'd copied during her years as a reluctant heiress to an empire built on others' suffering. She spoke clearly about the systematic destruction of smaller companies, the bribes paid to regulatory officials, the way her father had celebrated each conquered business like a war trophy. When the prosecution asked about her motivations for coming forward, Amy's eyes found Ben's across the crowded courtroom. I met some of the people whose lives had been destroyed by these business practices, she said into the microphone. I realized that behind every company we targeted, there were real families, real dreams being crushed for profit margins. I couldn't be part of that anymore. The defense attorney, a sharp-faced woman in an expensive suit, tried to discredit Amy's testimony by painting her as a spoiled rich girl seeking attention. But Amy had prepared for those attacks. She'd spent months working with Agent Martinez and the prosecution team, understanding that this testimony would make her a target for the rest of her life. During a recess, Ben appeared at her side with a thermos of coffee and a steady presence that grounded her in the midst of legal warfare. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly. "Knowing that every word I speak is destroying what's left of my family," Amy replied honestly, "but also knowing that it's the right thing to do." Ben squeezed her hand. "Anna always said that doing the right thing usually costs more than you want to pay, but the price of not doing it is always higher in the end." The trial lasted 6 weeks. Harrison Thornfield was ultimately convicted on 12 counts of corporate fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy, sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Thornfield Industries was dissolved, its assets liquidated to provide restitution to the companies and individuals it had destroyed. Amy received nothing from her family's former empire. She'd renounced any claim to inheritance as part of her plea agreement with federal prosecutors. But as she walked out of the courthouse into the crisp April morning, Ben's hand warm in hers, she felt richer than she'd ever been as a billionaire's daughter. The media attention was intense for several months, with reporters occasionally showing up in Cedar Falls hoping to document the fallen heiress story. But small towns protect their own, and the residents of Cedar Falls had quickly closed ranks around Ben, Amy, and Lily. Mrs. Patterson gave particularly memorable interviews about respecting people's privacy, and Martha at the diner became famous for serving reporters decaf when they'd ordered regular coffee. Eventually, the story faded from headlines, replaced by fresher scandals and more current dramas. Amy found work at the Cedar Falls Community Center, developing programs for at-risk youth and single-parent families. Her business education, stripped of its predatory applications, proved valuable in securing grants and organizing resources for people who needed help navigating bureaucratic systems. She lived modestly in a small apartment above the used bookstore on Main Street, her view encompassing the town square where she'd first watched Ben and Lily at the farmer's market. The apartment was furnished with pieces Ben had crafted: a kitchen table worn smooth by countless meals, bookshelves that held her growing collection of social work texts, a window seat perfect for reading on rainy afternoons. Every evening, she joined Ben and Lily for dinner, their routine as comfortable as if she'd been part of their family for years rather than months. Lily had adapted to Amy's presence with the resilience of childhood, accepting her as a natural addition to their small unit. The little girl still wound Anna's music box every night, but now it held 2 dancers, Anna's original figure and the one Ben had carved for Amy, spinning together in eternal partnership. On a warm evening in late September, almost exactly 1 year after the runaway truck had changed all their lives, Amy sat on Ben's front porch, watching him teach Lily how to use a small carving knife on a piece of soft pine. The lesson was as much about patience and respect for tools as it was about woodworking technique, and Amy marveled at Ben's ability to pass on both practical skills and life wisdom in the space of a simple craft project. "What are you making, sweetheart?" Amy asked as Lily held up her work for inspection. "It's supposed to be a cat," Lily said, frowning at the somewhat abstract result. "But it looks more like a really fat snake." Ben laughed, the sound rich and easy in the evening air. "All art is interpretation," he told his daughter solemnly. "Maybe the world needs more fat snakes." Amy smiled at their easy banter, thinking about how different this scene was from her own childhood, where mistakes had been met with criticism and perfection had been the only acceptable standard. Here, in this modest house with its small garden and handmade furniture, she'd learned that love wasn't about meeting impossible expectations, but about being accepted, flaws and all. As autumn settled over Cedar Falls, Amy found herself thinking often about the concept of home. She'd grown up in mansions that felt like museums, surrounded by beautiful objects that couldn't be touched, and art that existed for display rather than joy. But home, she'd discovered, wasn't about square footage or property values. It was about the way Lily automatically set 3 places at the dinner table, the way Ben saved the morning's crossword puzzle for Amy to finish over coffee, the way they'd all learned to navigate around each other's rhythms and moods with the gentle consideration of people who'd chosen to build a life together. Sometimes she still woke up amazed that this was her reality, that she'd found family not through blood or obligation, but through the simple act of choosing each other every day. The music box on the mantel continued to play its nightly song, 2 figures dancing in perfect harmony, a reminder that love wasn't about replacing what was lost, but about creating space for new beginnings alongside cherished memories. And sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet, Amy could swear she heard Anna's voice in the melody, welcoming her home. Winter brought its own challenges and joys. Ben taught Amy to build fires in the old stone fireplace, showed her how to split kindling and arrange logs for maximum heat. Lily's piano skills continued to improve, and she began composing her own simple melodies, playing them on the church piano during their weekly practice sessions. Amy had never realized how much she'd missed music until she heard those tentative compositions, not technically perfect, but filled with the kind of emotional honesty that no amount of training could provide. The 3 of them developed their own traditions: Saturday morning pancakes shaped like animals, evening walks around the town square regardless of weather, bedtime stories that became increasingly elaborate as they took turns adding chapters to ongoing adventures. Amy's apartment remained officially her address, but more and more of her belongings migrated to Ben's house. Books on the living room shelves, coffee mugs in the kitchen cabinet, a toothbrush in the bathroom medicine chest. Neither she nor Ben spoke about the gradual merger of their lives. It happened organically, naturally, like water finding its level. Spring arrived early that year, and with it came the first anniversary of Amy's testimony. The date passed quietly, marked only by a brief news article about Harrison Thornfield's appeal being denied. Amy felt a complex mix of sadness and relief. Grief for the father she'd lost, not to death, but to his own choices, and gratitude for the life she'd built from the ashes of her old existence. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching Lily practice cartwheels in the yard, Ben broached a subject they'd been dancing around for months. "I've been thinking about Anna's ring," he said quietly, not looking at Amy but keeping his eyes on his daughter's gymnastics display. Amy's heart stuttered, unsure where the conversation was heading. She always said she wanted it to represent love that continues, love that grows instead of ending. Ben pulled the simple gold band from his pocket. He'd stopped wearing it months ago, but Amy knew he kept it close. "I think she'd want it to be part of something new, something that honors what we had while celebrating what we've found." Amy stared at the ring, understanding the magnitude of what he was offering. Not just marriage, but inclusion in a legacy of love that stretched back to include Anna and forward to encompass whatever future they'd build together. "Are you asking me to marry you?" Amy said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ben finally met her eyes, and she saw everything she needed to know in his gaze: love, certainty, and the kind of courage it takes to risk your heart again after profound loss. "I'm asking if you want to be Lily's mom," he said simply. "If you want to be my partner in this life we're building. If you want to make it official, legal, permanent." Amy looked at Lily, who had abandoned her cartwheels and was now attempting to teach a patient golden retriever from next door how to fetch properly. The little girl caught Amy watching and waved enthusiastically, dirt smudged on her cheek and happiness radiating from every pore. This child, who had never known her biological mother, but who had somehow learned to love with the same generous spirit Anna must have possessed, had become as precious to Amy as if she'd carried her for 9 months. "Yes," Amy said, the word carrying the weight of every choice that had brought her to this moment. Yes to all of it. Ben slipped Anna's ring onto Amy's finger, where it settled like it had been waiting all along for exactly this purpose. They were married on a Saturday in June, in the same community centre where Amy had first heard Lily play piano. The ceremony was simple, attended by the close-knit community that had embraced Amy as one of their own. Mrs. Patterson served as matron of honour, Martha from the diner handled the catering, and half the town showed up with folding chairs and casseroles. Lily served as both flower girl and ring-bearer, taking her duties with the utmost seriousness. Amy wore a dress she'd bought at the local boutique, nothing like the designer gowns hanging in her former closet, but perfect for a woman starting fresh in a small Oregon town. Ben wore his father's suit, altered to fit, and carried in his pocket a small wooden figure he'd carved as a wedding gift for Amy. A family of 3, holding hands, their faces turned toward an uncertain but hopeful future. During the ceremony, when the minister asked if they would love and honor each other in all circumstances, Amy thought about the truck that had nearly ended her story before it began, the secrets that had nearly destroyed their chance at happiness, and the grace that had brought them through to this moment of pure joy. The reception lasted until well past midnight, filled with dancing, laughter, and the kind of celebration that happens when a community comes together to witness love triumph over circumstances. Amy danced with Ben to their wedding song, an old Johnny Cash tune about finding redemption in unexpected places, and later with Lily to a Disney soundtrack, both of them giggling as they spun around the makeshift dance floor. As the evening wound down and guests began filtering home, Amy found herself standing outside the community center, looking up at the star-filled Oregon sky and marveling at the journey that had brought her here. A year and a half ago, she'd been Amelia Thornfield, heir to a corporate empire built on others' suffering, sleepwalking through a life that looked perfect from the outside, but felt empty at its core. Tonight, she was Amy Carter, wife to a carpenter, mother to a 7-year-old with dreams of becoming a concert pianist, and member of a community that measured wealth in kindness rather than bank balances. Ben appeared beside her, loosening his tie as he wrapped an arm around her waist. "No regrets?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Amy leaned into his warmth, breathing in the scent of sawdust and contentment that always seemed to surround him. "Only that it took a runaway truck to bring us together," she said. "But I suppose some of the best things in life are worth waiting for, even when you don't know you're waiting." 18 months later, Amy stood at the kitchen window of their house. Officially their house now, the apartment above the bookstore having been vacated in favor of the home they'd built together. Watching Ben teach Lily and her friend Madison how to build a treehouse in the old oak behind the garden. The project had been ongoing for weeks, with Ben patiently explaining concepts of structural engineering while the girls contributed enthusiasm and an endless supply of questions. Amy smiled as she watched her husband demonstrate proper hammer technique, remembering how her own father had viewed children as inconveniences to be managed rather than individuals to be nurtured. The contrast still amazed her sometimes. How different love looked when it wasn't conditional on performance or achievement. On the kitchen counter, Anna's music box sat open, its 2 dancers spinning their eternal waltz, while Lily's latest composition played softly from the tablet nearby. The little girl had been working on a piece she called Family Song, and though it was technically simple, it captured something essential about their life together. Harmony that didn't require perfection, melody that made room for all voices. The phone rang, interrupting Amy's contented observation of the backyard construction project. Agent Martinez's number appeared on the caller ID, a reminder that her past occasionally intruded on her present, in the form of legal updates and security briefings. Harrison's parole hearing has been scheduled for next spring, Martinez informed her without preamble. His lawyers are arguing for early release based on good behavior and deteriorating health. I wanted you to know in case you decide to provide victim impact testimony. Amy closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of decisions that rippled beyond her immediate family. Will my testimony make a difference? She asked. Possibly. But you've fulfilled your legal obligations. This choice is entirely yours. After hanging up, Amy remained at the window, watching Ben boost Lily up to nail a board into place, while Madison held the level steady. These were the moments her father would have called weakness, the choice to prioritize family time over career advancement, to find satisfaction in small accomplishments rather than grand gestures. But Amy had learned that strength came in many forms, and some of the most powerful acts were also the quietest ones. That evening, after the girls had been fed and Madison had been returned to her own family, Amy sat on the front porch with Ben and told him about the phone call. Lily was inside, practicing piano, her music drifting through the open windows along with the golden light of late summer. "What do you want to do?" Ben asked, his hand finding hers on the porch swing they'd installed the previous spring. "I keep thinking about all the other families like ours," Amy said slowly. "People whose lives were destroyed by Thornfield Industries, who deserve to know that there are consequences for that kind of harm." She paused, listening to Lily's careful rendition of a Bach invention. Technically imperfect, but filled with the kind of joy that made imperfection irrelevant. "But I also think about Lily, about the life we've built here, about whether stirring up the past serves anyone at this point." Ben was quiet for a long moment, considering her words with the same thoughtfulness he brought to every important decision. "Anna used to say that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose peace over justice, especially when you've already paid such a high price for doing what's right." Amy squeezed his hand, grateful as always for his ability to see complex situations clearly. "And sometimes," she replied, "the bravest thing is to keep fighting, even when you're tired of the battle." In the end, Amy chose to provide written testimony for her father's parole hearing rather than appearing in person. Her statement was clear and uncompromising. Harrison Thornfield had shown no genuine remorse for the lives he'd destroyed, and early release would send a dangerous message about accountability for corporate crimes. But she also made peace with whatever decision the parole board reached, understanding that she'd already reclaimed her life from her father's influence in the ways that mattered most. The hearing took place on a Tuesday in October, exactly 3 years after the runaway truck had changed everything. Amy spent the day helping at Lily's school fall festival, manning the ring toss booth and watching Ben judge the pie contest with the serious attention the role deserved. That evening, they learned that Harrison's parole had been denied. He would serve his full sentence, with the possibility of another hearing in 5 years. Amy felt a complex mix of relief and sadness, knowing that justice had been served while also grieving the final closure of a relationship that had once defined her entire world. But as autumn deepened into winter, and their second Christmas as a family approached, Amy found herself thinking less about endings and more about continuations. Lily's piano skills had progressed to the point where she could play simple duets with Amy, their 4 hands creating harmonies that filled the house with music. Ben had expanded his workshop to include a small classroom where he taught woodworking to local teenagers, passing on skills that connected them to both tradition and possibility. And Amy's work at the community center had grown to include a mentorship program for young women from troubled backgrounds, offering them the kind of guidance and support she'd never received growing up in privilege but isolation. Their life had a rhythm now, a sense of purpose that felt both grounded and forward-looking. Some evenings, Amy would catch herself marveling at the ordinary magic of their existence, homework help and bedtime stories, grocery shopping and garden planning, the million small decisions that create a shared life. On New Year's Eve, as Cedar Falls celebrated with its traditional bonfire in the town square, Amy stood with her family watching sparks rise into the star-filled sky. Lily, now 8 and growing tall, leaned against Amy's side while Ben's arm encircled them both. Around them, their neighbors and friends counted down to midnight, voices joining in anticipation of whatever the new year might bring. As the clock struck 12 and the crowd erupted in cheers, Amy felt the profound contentment of someone who had found her place in the world not through birthright or achievement, but through the simple choice to love and be loved in return. The woman who had once stood motionless in a crosswalk, ready to let fate decide her future, was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that the best lives aren't the ones that look perfect from the outside, but the ones that feel genuine from within. And as Ben kissed her, while snow began to fall on the celebration around them, Amy knew that sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin with the most ordinary moments. A truck, a rescue, a choice to stay and see what might grow from the seeds of unexpected grace.